The notification from my bank hit my phone at 3 a.m. 6 figures, gone. Just like that. I stared at the screen, my stomach dropping as I recognized the name on the transfer. Francesca Ortiz. My own mother. I'm Valerie, and until last week, I was living my best life in Chicago as a rising architect. Now I'm driving down a dusty Oklahoma road, watching familiar landmarks crawl past my windshield like ghosts from a past I thought I'd buried. My phone buzzes. It's Connor from the office. Val, you don't have to do this alone. Let me call some people. I've got it handled. I cut him off, watching a faded billboard for Pete's Pecan Pie slide by. Besides, I already filed the lawsuit. The hearing's tomorrow. Just be careful. Small towns have long memories. He's right about that. As I pull into Millbrook's main street, every storefront seems to whisper about the girl who left 13 years ago, determined never to look back. The girl whose mother chose a string of deadbeat boyfriends over her own daughter. The Continental Inn's neon sign flickers as I park. Before I can grab my overnight bag, a familiar voice rings out across the lot. Well, if it isn't Valerie Ortiz, back from the big city. Tiffany. My old best friend stands there in scrubs, looking exactly like she did in high school, just with shorter hair and more confident posture. Tiff? I manage a smile despite everything. How did you? Small town, honey. News travels faster than light here. She pulls me into a hug that smells like hospital antiseptic and coconut shampoo. Plus, I saw the court filing. Everyone's talking about it. Great. I roll my eyes. So much for the element of surprise. Oh, trust me, your mother was plenty surprised. Tiffany's expression darkens. She's been at the diner all week, crying to anyone who'll listen about her ungrateful daughter. Ungrateful? I laugh, but it comes out harsh. She stole my life savings, $200,000 I'd been saving for my own firm. For Marshall's lawsuit, right? Tiffany asks, leaning against my car. That sleazeball she's dating? Yeah. Apparently, he's being sued for fraud or something. Mom convinced herself he's innocent, that it's all a big misunderstanding. I shake my head. She actually thought I wouldn't notice the money missing. Classic Francesca. Tiffany sighs, always thinking with her heart instead of her head. A police cruiser rolls by slowly, and I feel the officer's eyes on us. Another reminder that in Millbrook, privacy is a foreign concept. Listen, Tiffany says, lowering her voice. There's something you should know before tomorrow. Marshall's been meeting with this young woman named Lexi. They're up to something. What kind of something? I don't know exactly, but I've seen them at the old mill, having these intense conversations. And get this, Lexi works at the bank where your mom made the transfer. My pulse quickens. You think they planned this together? All I know is, nothing in this town is ever simple. Tiffany pushes off from the car. Come on, I'll buy you a coffee. You look like you could use one. As we walk toward the diner, I spot my mother's red Camry parked outside the church. My hands clench involuntarily. I saw that, Tiffany says quietly. You're not just here for the money, are you? No. I watch an elderly man, Forrest Powell, I realize, shuffle into the church. I'm here to make her face what she did, all of it, not just the money. Well, you picked quite a homecoming. Tiffany holds the diner door open. Half the town will be at that hearing tomorrow. They're calling it the showdown of the decade. Inside, conversations halt as heads turn toward us. I feel the weight of dozens of eyes, each carrying years of judgments and assumptions. Let them stare, I mutter, sliding into a booth. Oh, they will, Tiffany signals the waitress. But here's what they don't know. I've got some documents you might want to see before tomorrow. Things that suggest your mom's boyfriend isn't just a fraud. He's been running cons all over the state. I lean forward, my coffee forgotten. Tell me everything. As Tiffany starts talking, I realize this isn't just about getting my money back anymore. It's about exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it gets. And tomorrow, in that courtroom, my mother will finally learn that some betrayals can't be fixed with tears and excuses. The bell above the diner door chimes, and I don't need to turn around to know it's her. I can feel Francesca's presence like a storm front moving in. Tomorrow can't come soon enough. The courthouse feels smaller than I remember. Every creak of the wooden benches echoes as people file in, their whispers creating a steady hum of anticipation. My attorney, Uriah, arranges papers on our table, while I try not to look at the empty chairs where my mother and Marshall should be sitting. "They're late," I whisper. "Classic power play," Uriah responds, adjusting his tie. They want to make an entrance. Right on cue, the doors swing open. Marshall strides in first, wearing an ill-fitting suit that probably hasn't seen daylight since the 90s. My mother follows, clutching her purse like a shield. She's wearing the pearl necklace I gave her for her 50th birthday, and the sight of it makes my blood boil. "All rise," the bailiff calls out, and Judge Harrison enters, her stern face surveying the packed courtroom. "Your Honor," Uriah stands, "we're here today regarding case number 2023 CV 4891, Ortiz versus Ortiz, concerning the unauthorized transfer of funds totaling $200,000 from my client's account." "Objection, Your Honor." Marshall's attorney jumps up. "The transfer was authorized. We have a signed document." "That's a lie!" The words burst out of me before I can stop them. Judge Harrison's gavel cracks against the wood. "Ms. Ortiz, outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Continue, counselor." Uriah nods, pulling out a stack of bank statements. "Your Honor, we have evidence showing a pattern of suspicious activity leading up to the transfer. On May 15th, someone accessed Ms. Ortiz's account from an IP address traced to the First Regional Bank of Millbrook, where the defendant's associate, Ms. White, is employed." I watch my mother's face carefully. She flinches at the mention of Lexi's name, her fingers twisting the pearl necklace. "Furthermore," Uriah continues, "we have security footage showing Ms. White meeting with Mr. Robertson multiple times in the weeks before the transfer." The courtroom erupts in murmurs. Tiffany, sitting in the front row, catches my eye and nods slightly. "Your Honor," Marshall's attorney stands again, "my client had no involvement in this transfer. This is a family matter between mother and daughter." "A family matter?" I can't help but laugh. "Is that what you call stealing your daughter's life savings for your con artist boyfriend?" "Valerie, please." My mother speaks for the first time, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. Marshall needs this money for his defense. He's innocent." "Mrs. Ortiz," Judge Harrison interrupts, "did you transfer the funds from your daughter's account?" My mother looks down at her hands. "Yes, but—" "And did you have authorization to access these funds?" "She's my daughter," my mother pleads. I thought she would understand once I explained." "Your Honor." Uriah steps forward, producing another document. "We have evidence suggesting this isn't just about unauthorized access. We believe Mr. Robertson orchestrated this entire scheme." Marshall's face darkens as Uriah hands the judge a folder. "These are bank records showing similar transfers in 3 other counties, all following the same pattern. Mr. Robertson befriends vulnerable women, convinces them he's in legal trouble, and somehow their bank accounts end up drained." "This is ridiculous!" Marshall stands, his face red. "Your Honor, these allegations are completely unfounded." But I'm watching my mother. The color has drained from her face as she stares at Marshall, really seeing him perhaps for the first time. "Additionally," Uriah continues, "we have a witness who can testify about Mr. Robertson's activities. Ms. White has agreed to cooperate with the investigation." The courtroom doors open and Lexi walks in, looking terrified but determined. Marshall's attorney drops his papers, scrambling to recover them as his client sinks into his chair. "Your Honor," Marshall's attorney stammers, "we request a brief recess to review this new evidence." Judge Harrison studies the documents, her expression grave. "Granted. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. And Mr. Robertson, I suggest you don't leave the building." As people file out, I catch my mother's eye. She looks lost, broken, like someone watching their world crumble in slow motion. Part of me wants to go to her, but I stay rooted to my chair, remembering the moment I discovered my account empty, My dreams of opening my own firm shattered. That went well, Uriah murmurs, gathering his papers. But brace yourself. This is just the beginning. Once Lexi testifies, I know. I watch as Marshall's attorney pulls him into a heated discussion in the corner. I just hope my mother survives the fallout. Tiffany appears at my elbow. Come on, you need air, and coffee, lots of coffee. As we head for the door, I hear my mother call my name. I pause but don't turn around. Val, please. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know everything. That's the problem, Mom, I say quietly. You never do. The courthouse doors feel heavy as I push through them, stepping into the bright Oklahoma sun. 1 hour until round 2, and I have a feeling the real bombshells haven't even dropped yet. The courthouse bathroom wasn't where I expected to uncover the next piece of the puzzle, but there I was, reapplying lipstick when Lexi burst in, phone pressed to her ear. Marshall, stop calling me! I told you, I'm doing the right thing! Her hands shook as she paced. No, you can't fix this. I saw the other files. I know about the women in Tulsa. I froze, pretending to dig through my purse while straining to hear. I don't care about the money anymore. Lexi's voice cracked. Do you know what Francesca did when she found out her daughter's account was empty? She brought me cookies. Homemade cookies, Marshall, while you had me helping you steal from her family. The door creaked, and Tiffany slipped in, eyes widening at the scene. I held up a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. No, I won't meet you at the mill. It's over. Lexi ended the call and finally noticed us. Her face went pale. Oh, God. Tulsa? I stepped forward. What happened in Tulsa? I shouldn't. Lexi glanced at the door. Hey! Tiffany moved to block the exit. You came here to tell the truth, right? So tell it. Lexi slumped against the sink. There were 3 other women, all single mothers, all with savings accounts. Marshall, he has a system. He finds women with money but low self-esteem, convinces them he's their last chance at love. And my mother fell for it, I said flatly. She wasn't supposed to take your money. Lexi's eyes filled with tears. The plan was to get her to empty her retirement account, but when Marshall found out about your savings... The bathroom door swung open again. My mother stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Is it true? She whispered. Everything she's saying? Mom, I started, but she walked past me to Lexi. Tell me the truth, all of it. Lexi took a shaky breath. He's done this before. Gets close to women, invents legal troubles, convinces them to help. Once he has the money, he disappears. Moves to the next town, changes his name slightly. Sometimes it's Robertson, sometimes Roberts, sometimes... Robinson, my mother finished, sinking onto a nearby chair. That's how he introduced himself at church. Marshall Robinson. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush us all. There's more, Lexi said quietly. The lawsuit he's supposedly fighting? It's real, but he's the defendant in a fraud case. Those women from Tulsa, they found each other, started comparing stories. They're the ones suing him. My mother's hand flew to her throat, clutching those damn pearls again. The money. He said it was for his defense attorney. It was, I said, understanding flooding in, but not to prove his innocence, to help him run before the case goes to trial. The courthouse bells chimed, signaling the end of recess. Tiffany checked her watch. We need to get back in there, all of us. My mother stood slowly, her face set in a way I hadn't seen since my father left. Lexi, will you testify about everything you just told us? Yes, Lexi nodded. I have documents too. Account numbers, dates, his real identity. Good. My mother straightened her jacket. Because I have something to add to your testimony. We filed out of the bathroom. An unlikely alliance formed in the most unlikely place. In the hallway, Marshall was waiting, his fake smile faltering as he saw us together. Franny, baby, what are you doing with them? Don't! My mother's voice could have frozen hell. Don't you dare baby me, Marshall Robertson, or Robinson, or whatever your real name is. His face hardened. You don't want to do this. Actually, I stepped between them. She does. We all do. The bailiff called us back into the courtroom. As we took our seats, I noticed my mother had removed the pearl necklace, leaving it coiled like a dead snake on the defendant's table. Your Honor, Uriah stood, we'd like to amend our complaint. This isn't just about unauthorized access to my client's account. We have evidence of a larger criminal enterprise. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Proceed. As Lexi took the stand, I watched Marshall's confident facade crumble. Each revelation hit him like a physical blow. The other victims, the fake identities, the planned escape. But it was my mother's testimony that silenced the courtroom. The night I took my daughter's money, she said, her voice clear and steady, Marshall told me he'd marry me once his legal troubles were over. Said we'd buy a house in Florida. She laughed bitterly. Turns out he told the same story to a widow in Tulsa, and a divorced nurse in Oklahoma City, and who knows how many others. I felt no satisfaction watching my mother's pain, only a hollow ache where my anger used to be. But as she continued her testimony, I realized this wasn't the same woman who'd chosen men over me all those years. This was someone finally choosing truth over comfort, no matter the cost. The question was, would that be enough? The old mill loomed against the darkening sky as I pulled into its empty parking lot. Tiffany's text had been urgent. Meet me here. Found something big. Don't tell anyone. I killed the engine, but left the headlights on, illuminating the weathered building's facade. A second set of lights appeared behind me. Tiffany's Honda. Sorry for the cloak and dagger stuff, she said, hurrying over with a manila envelope. But after what happened in court today, Marshall's attorney cornered me at the diner. What? Why? Because of this. She pulled out a stack of photographs. Remember when I used to work at the bank, before nursing school? Look who I found in their security archives. The first photo showed Marshall, younger with darker hair, standing next to a familiar face. My father. That's impossible, I whispered. Dad left town 15 years ago. Keep looking. The next photo showed them shaking hands outside the bank. The date stamp read just 2 weeks before my father disappeared with his secretary and half the money from my college fund. Son of a bitch, I breathed. It wasn't a coincidence. Marshall targeted my mother because he helped your father clean out your accounts back then, Tiffany finished. It's his signature move. He works with desperate men, helps them disappear, then circles back years later to prey on their abandoned families. A car door slammed somewhere in the darkness. We both jumped. Ladies! Marshall's voice carried across the lot. Having a nice chat? He emerged into the headlights, looking nothing like the polished con man from the courtroom. His tie was loose, his eyes wild. Stay back, Tiffany warned, pulling out her phone. Or what? You'll call the police? He laughed. About some old photos? Good luck proving anything? We don't need to prove it, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mom's testimony was enough. The judge froze your accounts. Your mother, he spat, is a fool, just like all the others. So desperate for love they'll believe anything. Like my father? I stepped forward. Was he desperate too, or just greedy? Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe fear. You don't know what you're talking about. I know you helped him steal my college fund. I know you waited all these years to come back and finish the job with my mother. What I don't know is why. Because it's elegant, he sneered. Poetic, even. The men pay me to help them vanish, and years later, their women pay me even more. Round and round it goes. Gravel crunched behind him. My mother stepped into the light. I recorded all of that, Marshall. She held up her phone. Every word. His face contorted. Franny. Don't move. Uriah's voice rang out as he and 2 police officers emerged from the shadows. Mr. Robertson, you're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy. As the officers approached with handcuffs, Marshall lunged toward my mother. I moved without thinking, stepping between them. His fist caught my jaw instead of her face. Pain exploded across my face as the officers tackled Marshall to the ground. Through the chaos, I heard my mother screaming my name. I'm okay, I managed, touching my split lip. I'm fine. No, you're not. She cradled my face, examining the injury. You're bleeding, because of me. Again. Mrs. Ortiz, Uriah called. We need your statement. She hesitated, looking between me and the officers, loading Marshall into a patrol car. Go, I said. Make it count. As she walked away, Tiffany pressed a cold can of soda against my jaw. You know what this means, right? She asked. With these photos, we can find your father. I don't care about finding him. I watched my mother giving her statement, her back straight, her voice clear. He made his choice. And your mom? Before I could answer, Marshall's attorney appeared, looking smug despite his client's arrest. Miss Ortiz, he said, straightening his glasses. I should warn you, my client has information about your firm's bidding practices in Chicago. Information that could be problematic. My stomach dropped. The Jensen contract, the dinner meetings, the favors. Are you threatening me? Simply stating facts. Drop the charges and this all goes away. He walked away, leaving me with a choice I never saw coming. Push forward with the charges and risk losing everything I'd built in Chicago, or let Marshall walk and keep my professional reputation intact. Val? Tiffany touched my arm. What was that about? I stared at the photos in my hand, proof of a decades-long scheme of betrayal and manipulation. In the distance, my mother's voice carried through the night air, strong and unwavering as she detailed Marshall's crimes. Nothing, I said finally. Just another desperate man making empty threats. But as I watched the patrol car drive away with Marshall in the back, I knew tomorrow would bring harder choices. The question was, would I be strong enough to make them? The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Marshall's attorney laid out his accusations. My hands gripped the wooden barrier separating the gallery from the proceedings, knuckles white. Your Honor, we have evidence that Ms. Ortiz secured the Jensen contract in Chicago through questionable means. He held up a folder. Private meetings, unauthorized incentives. Objection, Uriah stood. This is irrelevant to the current case. On the contrary, Marshall's attorney smiled. It speaks to character. How can we trust the testimony of someone who... A deep voice cut through the tension. That's enough, Richard. Everyone turned as Forrest Powell, the town's eldest council member, rose from his seat. He walked slowly to the front, his cane tapping against the floor. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Harrison nodded, curiosity evident on her face. I've lived in this town for 78 years, Forrest began. Watched families grow, businesses rise and fall. And I've seen men like Marshall come and go, leaving broken lives in their wake. He turned to face me. I also remember when young Valerie here won the state architecture competition, 17 years old, designing affordable housing for senior citizens. He chuckled. Still have the newspaper clipping. Mr. Powell, Marshall's attorney interrupted. This is touching, but I'm not finished. Forrest's voice hardened. That Jensen contract they're talking about? It was for a retirement community, one that's giving homes to seniors who couldn't afford them otherwise. I checked. My throat tightened. I'd never told anyone here about that project. So, yes, Forrest continued. Maybe she had some private meetings. Maybe she pulled some strings. But not for profit, for people. Unlike your client, who's been stealing from widows and single mothers across 3 states. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison banged her gavel. Mr. Powell makes a valid point, she said. These allegations about Ms. Ortiz's professional conduct are irrelevant to the matter at hand. Motion to dismiss this line of questioning. Marshall's attorney deflated visibly. In the defendant's chair, Marshall's face darkened with rage. You think you're so clever, he snarled, standing suddenly. All of you. But you don't know everything. Tell them, Francesca. Tell them about the other money. My mother, who had been silent until now, lifted her chin. Go ahead, Marshall. Tell them. Tell them how you convinced me to empty my retirement account, too. How you promised we'd use it to start a new life together. Mom! I turned to her, shocked. Your retirement savings? All of it, she said quietly. $63,000. I transferred it the day before I took your money. Lexi, sitting in the witness box, cleared her throat. Your Honor, I have the transfer records here. And there's something else. She handed a document to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Harrison. The judge's eyebrows rose as she read. Mr. Robertson, she said, this document shows you attempted to transfer both sums to an offshore account this morning, from jail. The courtroom exploded again. This time, Marshall's attorney looked genuinely surprised. Your Honor, I had no knowledge. Save it, Judge Harrison snapped. Bailiff, take Mr. Robertson into custody. Add attempted wire fraud to his charges. As the bailiff approached, Marshall made one last desperate play. Francesca, baby, don't let them do this. Remember what we talked about? Florida? The beach house? My mother stood, removing her wedding ring, the one Marshall had given her 2 months ago. The only beach you're going to see is in the prison yard. I couldn't help it. I laughed. The sound seemed to break something in Marshall. He lunged forward, but the bailiff caught him. This isn't over, he shouted as they dragged him away. You'll regret this, all of you. In the chaos that followed, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Forrest stood there, looking tired but satisfied. You did good, kid, he said. Both of you did. He nodded toward my mother. Sometimes the hardest part of revenge is knowing when to let it go. I'm not sure I'm there yet, I admitted. No? He smiled. Then why did you step in front of that punch last night? Could have let him hit her. Would have been justified, given everything. Before I could answer, Uriah called me over to discuss next steps. But Forrest's words stuck with me as I watched my mother gather her things, her hands shaking slightly as she put away the ring she'd thrown at Marshall. Val, she said as I passed her, what he said about your work in Chicago. Don't. I held up a hand. We're not there yet, she nodded, understanding in her eyes. But maybe someday? Maybe, I conceded. But first, we need to talk about your retirement fund. As we left the courthouse, reporters clustered on the steps, cameras flashing. But all I could think about was Forrest's question. Why had I stepped in front of that punch? The answer, I was beginning to realize, might change everything. He's going to plead guilty, Uriah announced, spreading papers across the diner's table. Marshall's attorney reached out this morning. They want to make a deal. I stirred my coffee, watching the cream create patterns. What kind of deal? Full restitution of your money and your mother's retirement fund, plus damages, in exchange for reduced charges. Tiffany, squeezed into the booth beside me, snorted. After everything he's done, he should rot. There's more, Uriah continued. He's willing to provide information about other victims, including the whereabouts of your father. The diner's bell chimed. My mother walked in, looking exhausted but determined. She slid into the booth across from me. I heard, she said simply. About the deal? How? Marshall called me from jail. She pulled out her phone, placing it on the table. I recorded it. Uriah pressed play. Marshall's voice filled our corner of the diner, desperate and wheedling. Franny, baby, I can make this right. I know where Robert is, your ex-husband. I can tell you everything. How we planned it, where he went, all of it. Just talk to Valerie, get her to accept the deal. My mother's recorded voice was steel. You really think knowing where he is matters to us anymore? Don't you want closure? Don't you want— What I want, she cut him off, is for you to understand what you did. Not just to me, but to every woman you deceived. To my daughter. Your daughter? He laughed bitterly. You're the one who took her money. Yes. I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right. But you? You'll spend the rest of yours knowing you failed. That in the end, we chose each other over you. The recording ended. Silence settled over our booth. Mom, I started, but she held up a hand. Before you decide about the deal, there's something you need to see. She pulled an envelope from her purse. I found these in Marshall's desk while the police were searching the house. Inside were more photos. My father and Marshall in different cities, different years, always with a new woman, a new scheme. Look at the dates, my mother said quietly. I did. The most recent was 3 months ago. Son of a bitch, Tiffany whispered. He's still running cons. Not anymore. Uriah gathered the photos. This is evidence of ongoing criminal activity. It voids any plea deal. The diner's door chimed again. Lexi rushed in, waving a USB drive. You need to see this, she said, breathless. I was going through the bank's security footage. Marshall wasn't just meeting your father recently. He was meeting with other men too. Teaching them, creating a network. My mother's face went pale. A network? Of con men, Lexi nodded. All targeting women like you, like the others. Uriah stood abruptly. I need to call the DA. This just became a much bigger case. As he stepped outside, I looked at my mother. Really looked at her. The weeks of stress had aged her, but there was something else there now. Strength. Purpose. What are you thinking? I asked. I'm thinking about all the other women out there, the ones who don't know yet, who still think they've found love instead of a predator. We can help them, Tiffany said. With this evidence, we can stop the whole network. But it means no deal, I pointed out. No quick resolution. No easy answers about Dad. Honey, my mother reached across the table, taking my hand. We stopped needing answers about your father the moment we started finding truth in ourselves. The diner's door opened again. Forrest hobbled in, making his way to our booth. Heard about the deal, he said, pulling up a chair. Also heard you found something bigger. Much bigger, Lexi confirmed. But if we pursue it? If we pursue it, I interrupted, we could help a lot of people. Stop this from happening to other families. Could be dangerous, Forrest warned. Men like Marshall, when they're cornered. Let them come, my mother said firmly. We're not hiding anymore. Uriah returned, his face serious. DA's on board. But we'll need statements from everyone. Every detail, every meeting, every dollar. I'll do it, Lexi said immediately. Me too, my mother nodded. I looked at the photos spread across the table. At my father's face, unchanged by conscience or consequence. At Marshall's smug smile, repeated in city after city. Where do we start? I asked. We start, Uriah said, pulling out his laptop, by telling the whole truth, no matter where it leads. Outside, the sun was setting on Millbrook, casting long shadows through the diner's windows. But inside our booth, something was rising. Understanding, resolution, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of healing. Okay, I said, squeezing my mother's hand. Let's tell the truth. The DA's office buzzed with activity as women from across 3 states arrived to tell their stories. I sat with my mother in the waiting area, watching faces I recognized from Marshall's photos come to life. Sarah! My mother suddenly stood, staring at a woman who'd just walked in. Sarah from the church group in Tulsa? The woman turned, recognition flooding her face. Francesca, oh my God! They hugged, both crying. I had no idea, my mother said. When Marshall talked about Tulsa, I never thought that he was running the same con there. Sarah wiped her eyes. That's how he worked. Kept us all separate, compartmentalized. Until now. Tiffany appeared with coffee cups and files. They're ready for your official statement, Francesca. And Val, Uriah needs you to look at something. In the conference room, Uriah spread out bank statements across the table. We found the pattern. Every time Marshall helped a man disappear, he kept records. Insurance, he called it. Blackmail, I corrected, scanning the documents. Ah, exactly. And look at this. He pointed to a series of transfers. Your father's been paying him monthly for 15 years. My hand shook as I picked up the paper. He's been in contact this whole time? Val, Tiffany's voice was gentle. There's more. Your father, he's here, in Oklahoma City. The room tilted slightly. What? The FBI picked him up this morning. They want you and your mother to identify him. A knock at the door made us all jump. Lexi poked her head in. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. Marshall's associates are starting to talk. One of them just implicated a bank president in Oklahoma City. Let me guess, I said bitterly. The same bank where my father's been hiding? Actually, yes. Lexi looked surprised. How did you? Because nothing in this mess is a coincidence anymore. I stood up. Where's my mother? We found her in the interview room with Sarah and two other women, sharing stories of Marshall's manipulation. She looked up when I entered. Val, what's wrong? They found Dad. The room went silent. My mother's face went through a series of emotions before settling on something like resignation. Where? Oklahoma City. They want us to… No. She stood up. I'm not interested in seeing him. Mom, listen to me. She took my hands. That man left us by choice, stayed away by choice, paid Marshall to keep his secrets by choice. I don't need to see him to know who he is anymore. Sarah cleared her throat. Francesca's right. We're not here for the men who left. We're here for the women who stayed, who fought back. A commotion in the hallway drew our attention. A group of FBI agents rushed past, followed by Uriah. They found Marshall's files, he announced. All of them. Names, dates, bank accounts. The whole network is exposed. How many? I asked. Dozens of men, hundreds of women. This is going to be national news by morning. My mother squeezed my hand. Then we better make sure we tell it right. The next few hours were a blur of statements and signatures. Women kept arriving, each with their own story of betrayal and survival. They gathered in groups, sharing coffee and tears, and, surprisingly often, laughter. Look at them, Tiffany said, watching the scene. Marshall thought he was destroying these women. Instead, he brought them together. Neat, speaking of Marshall, Uriah approached with his phone. He's asking to speak with you, Valerie. Says he has information about your firm's contracts that could still cause problems. I thought about my career in Chicago, the years of hard work, the reputation I'd built. Then I looked at the room full of survivors. Tell him to go to hell, I said. My firm will survive an audit. He won't survive what's coming. That's my girl, my mother said softly. Forrest appeared in the doorway, leaning on his cane. Ladies, you might want to turn on the news. It's starting. Someone found a remote, and suddenly the room was filled with the sound of our story. Photos of Marshall and his associates flashed across the screen. Pictures of my father appeared briefly, but I barely recognized him anymore. In a breaking story, the anchor announced, a multi-state fraud investigation has uncovered what authorities are calling one of the largest organized romance scam networks in recent history. Well, my mother said, watching the screen, I guess there's no going back now. No, I agreed, but maybe that's not such a bad thing. Sarah raised her coffee cup. To moving forward. One by one, the women in the room lifted their cups. Mothers and daughters, victims turned warriors, strangers turned family. To moving forward, we echoed. Outside, reporters were gathering, hungry for details. But in that room, something more important was happening. Something that felt like healing, like justice, like hope. And for the first time since this all began, I knew exactly where we were headed. The keys to my new office felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the door. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the freshly painted walls and the sign I'd hung just yesterday. Ortiz and Associates Architecture, Millbrook Branch. Need help with those boxes? Tiffany called from the hallway, carrying coffee and bagels. Just set them anywhere, I said, running my hand along the drafting table. Still can't believe this is happening. Light, I can. She grinned. The moment you decided to use your settlement money to open a local branch instead of returning to Chicago, I knew you'd found your way home. The door chimed as my mother walked in, carrying a potted plant. Housewarming gift, she announced, though technically it's office warming. Thanks, Mom. I took the plant, noticing her hands were trembling slightly. You okay? The sentencing is today, she reminded me. Marshall and your father. We don't have to go, I said quickly. Yes, we do. She straightened her shoulders. But first, I want to see my daughter's new office. We showed her around. The conference room where I'd meet clients, the workspace where local architecture students could intern, the wall already covered with preliminary sketches for affordable housing projects. Val? Lexi appeared in the doorway. Sorry to interrupt, but Sarah's here with the others. They're ready. In the parking lot, a group of women waited. Sarah, now running a support group for fraud survivors. Mrs. Thompson from Tulsa, who'd testified against my father. Even Forrest had come, standing proud despite his cane. You didn't all have to come, my mother protested. Yes, we did. Sarah linked arms with her. We started this together. We'll finish it together. The courthouse was packed. Marshall sat with his attorney, looking defeated in his orange jumpsuit. My father was there too, separated from his former partner, refusing to meet our eyes. Judge Harrison entered, her face stern. Before I deliver the sentences, would any of the victims like to make a final statement? I stood before I could stop myself. Your Honor? Walking to the podium, I felt every eye in the room. But for once, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal or anger. Just clarity. When this started, I came home seeking revenge. I wanted to hurt my mother the way she hurt me. Make my father pay for abandoning us. Make Marshall suffer for manipulating everyone. I turned to face them all. But something unexpected happened. In pursuing revenge, we found something better. We found truth. We found strength. We found each other. My mother wiped tears from her eyes as I continued. These men thought they were destroying us. Instead, they showed us who we really are. Survivors, warriors, community. So yes, they deserve punishment for their crimes. But they've already failed in their ultimate goal, to break us apart. Judge Harrison nodded slowly. Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. Does anyone else wish to speak? My mother stood. Just this, she said clearly. I forgive myself. For being fooled, for making mistakes, for hurting my daughter. But I don't forgive them. They don't deserve it. The sentences came down hard. 20 years for Marshall. 15 for my father and his accomplices. Asset forfeiture, restitution. Outside, reporters clamored for statements, but we walked past them to where Tiffany waited with her car. Back to the office? She asked. Actually, I said, I was thinking we could all go to the diner. I hear Pete's serving his famous pecan pie today. Count me in, Sarah laughed. But first... She pulled out her phone, showing us a news alert. Look who made the cover of Architectural Digest. There it was, my new firm, featured in an article about architects giving back to their communities. The photo showed me standing with my mother outside the office, both of us smiling. They called you a rising star, my mother said proudly. They called us survivors, I corrected, showing her the headline, From Fraud to Foundation, How One Family's Story Inspired a Movement. At the diner, we crowded into booths, mothers, daughters, friends, survivors. Pete himself brought out slices of pie. On the house, he insisted, for our local heroes. We're not heroes, I protested. No? Forrest raised an eyebrow. Then what would you call women who turned tragedy into triumph? Who chose healing over hatred? Lucky, my mother said softly. I'd call us lucky. I looked around the diner, at Tiffany showing Lexi her nursing school acceptance letter, at Sarah organizing the next support group meeting, at my mother finally wearing a genuine smile. No, I said, squeezing her hand. We're not lucky. We're strong, and we're just getting started. Outside, the Millbrook sun painted the sky in shades of possibility. Inside, we ate pie and made plans, our laughter drowning out the last echoes of betrayal. This wasn't the revenge I'd come home seeking. It was something better, something real. It was, finally, the truth.